Okay, part 2 here. I'm going to continue where I left off at with the bad guy shooting at you. Okay, so now I do the same thing for the pink line for the second bad guy. And like I said, for each bad guy, you gotta make more of these shooting range elements for the pink and red lines, because the reason why, because with this pink line here, when it says object make fire other, so what I noticed here was when I made these pink lines here and this red line here for this one bad guy, once I destroyed him, it got rid of these pink lines here, and it got rid of these pink lines here basically, which means that it got rid of these pink lines too here for the next bad guy, which then he didn't shoot. So you have to make new pink lines for each bad guy, and pink lines meaning the shooting range of the bad guy. So that's the only drawback about this. So it may take a little longer to make your bad guys, but for Game Maker 8.1, it's great because you can just duplicate the bad guys, and you can duplicate the objects that you want without having any issues. I noticed with Studios, when you duplicate images, it messes it up. When you change the object name, then the other object name that you just duplicated, it changes that too. But in Game Maker 8.1, it doesn't do that. If you change the object name, it doesn't change the object name of the other element, the other object. So now the sprint name will stay the same in Game Maker 8.1, but that doesn't matter. The main thing is changing the object name. So, like I said, you can like with all these elements here, with object, the guy fires and he doesn't fire, and then he dies. Then you have the lines, that the red line that makes the guy not fire, and the pink line that makes him fire. The red line doesn't make him fire. Okay, I just right click and then duplicate, and then so all you have to do is change the object name. The sprint name will stay the same, but don't worry about that. That's not the problem. Changing the object name is what you want to change, and make sure it's different. And like I said, with Game Maker Studios, when you change the object name, then it changes the object name of the other duplicated information, which is stupid. I don't know why. There's a flaw in the Studios for some reason for that. But with Game Maker 8.1, you don't have to worry about it. You can duplicate it, so it saves you time. You don't have to copy and paste each element and then make all the actions happen again like in Studios. So that's the only drawback about this. You got to make sure that this range line is different name compared to this range name, because once this guy's destroyed, it destroys these pink range lines, and you won't get hit anymore, and the guy's gone. But that's why you have to make new pink range names for the second bad guy, because otherwise these will be destroyed when you destroy this guy. So you got to make sure that this object name is different compared to this object name, if that makes sense to you. Alright, so so I made a group. I grouped these by just right clicking on the object and made a group name for the first bad guy and the second bad guy, and all the elements that go along with it, which means the range where you don't get hit and the range you do get hit. All that's grouped together so it's organized for you. So, like I said, an object guy fire 2. All this information right here is talking about this is the firing elements, where it shoots the player and it shoots the wall and what happens and all that stuff when it hits certain things. I've already kind of talked about that with the monster video, so I'm not going to go in detail about that. And then you have the VAR, which I've already talked about this, the image speed on how fast the bad guy's going to go when he shoots his weapon. And then after 2 milliseconds, it's going to switch to him not firing the weapon. Make sure that the performance event is set to not. Otherwise, you're going to see that die element added to the bad guy when he shoots, and it doesn't make sense. So make sure that perform events is set to not. And then you have the draw event, which is going to draw the character, which I've already talked about this with the monsters, which is a text _guy _fire. And that is going to be, that code is related to in the sprints under the textures. And it shows 3 images of the guy. So this guy right here, he's going to actually shoot back and forth. Then you have the guy that doesn't shoot, and he's just standing there doing nothing. And then when he dies, when you shoot him, he dies. All right, and that's what happens when you have destroy in here from the add event. Then it says instance create X, Y, object guy dies too. Yeah, that's another thing is when you duplicate your images, you got to make sure that this code is related to this object name up here. So for the first bad guy, and then destroy, see it says object _guy dies, and that relates to this object here. So that's the only thing, when you duplicate your images, make sure that the information matches the object name. If it doesn't, it's not going to work correctly when you play the game. But in the draw event, text _guy _fires, that's the same as, this doesn't apply. Okay, this sprint name that you get for the textures, you don't have to worry about the sprint names and the textures. Okay, that can remain the same. What matters is in the object name. Alright, so all this code remains the same. You don't have to change anything there. But in the destroy, make sure that it's, when you kill the guy, that it's going to be, it relates to the object character for that particular name. And then this correlates this, and then when he goes back to not firing, make sure it correlates to the name here. Object name fires. Right here it says not fires. Well, it has to say not fire. That still correlates with the first guy firing. So with object guy 2, it correlates to object guy not firing 2. Okay, so it relates to that. Even though it says guy firing 2, this is guy not firing 2, but that all correlates with the file name of guy fire 2. So that's under this location right here. So that's what I'm talking about. It needs to be under that file location for that particular guy. So you can't say object _guy not fire, which correlates to the first guy fire 1. It cannot say that, otherwise it's not going to work correctly. So this guy not fire 2 relates to guy fire 2, which is in that file under 2. So that's what I'm talking about. Alright, and then this object guy fire 2 applies to object monster basics, which I've already talked about in my previous video. So that's talking about the information about how the code's going to work when it hits the wall and all that stuff. It's going to relate to this code here, but the thing is, the character doesn't move, so I probably didn't have to parent that object up with the monster basic, because the bad guy stays there. He doesn't have to interact with the wall. You know what I'm saying? So I probably didn't have to parent it up with the monster basics. The monster basics, when I talked about in the first video with the monsters, they're actually moving, and they may bump up against the wall, so that's why that code would be added to that monster basics, because they're physically moving towards you, but they may potentially hit the wall. So this code would apply to the monsters because they may hit the wall, and they would have to stop at the wall. So this code would correlate with the monsters, but not so much for these guys, these bad guys that have the weapon in their hand, because they're not moving. So I probably didn't have to parent it to that monster basics, if you see what I'm talking about. But, you know, I just kind of like went with the flow with keeping consistency, I suppose, so I just made that parented. Alright, and this code right here, I made, I think in the monsters, this was set to 3, I believe. I made this 0. That made sure that the guy was flush on, on the ground, so he's not floating in the air. So if I had set this 0, if I changed the 0 to 3, then he would be floating in the air. And since the character is a little smaller than the monsters, I had to make that 0, and that which pushed the guy character down. So you can't just go into the sprints and go to your textures and then go to your guy element and change the crosshairs and push them down. And that doesn't work. You can't use the crosshairs to push the character down. You have to actually physically go into the code to do that. So you go to the draw event, and you have to change the code to 0. The 19, that talks about laying the character flat. So if I change this to 0 up here, then the character would be flat on the ground, and he wouldn't be standing straight up. So the only thing I had to change was this number down here at the bottom to 0, and that made sure that he was flush to the floor, and he wasn't floating in the air. And everything else remained the same. This other code basically talks about when the character moves past him, the character is going to rotate his body so he's looking straight at him. That's the same kind of element I use for, when you pick up ammo, whatever, the ammo is following the character when he rotates around. Okay, so, and then when the character, I've already talked about the lines, when he hits the lines. I think I talked about everything here. I think the main thing here is just play around with it. If I missed something that I didn't talk about, which sometimes I do that, and I don't mean to, but I think I talked about everything here. But the main thing here is just I would just play around with it. Download this GameMaker 8.1 and just go in here and just play around with what I did here, and just watch my video, and at the same time mess around with this, so you get more of understanding how it was done by watching the video and playing around with the elements and changing things. That's how I learned, is basically just playing around with it, and then eventually you'll understand it better once you play around with it and understand how everything was done. And sometimes I don't explain everything and so correctly, or so I try to anyways. So like I said, just download the GameMaker 8.1 and play around with it and watch my video at the same time to understand it better. And I'll make more videos in the future. Like I said, I think I talked about everything here. And like the lines, these red lines and the pink lines, there's nothing in there. There's nothing in there at all. It's on the object player when he collides with it. The red and pink lines. For the pink line represents the shooting range, the red makes him not shoot. Okay, thanks for watching.